The thing that I'm most passionate about is not so much the nuclear issue as about a way of looking at the world that Superman represents. In fact, he says at the end of the movie, in a line that I wrote, he says, I just wish you could all see the Earth the way that I see it. Because when you really look at it, it's just one world. And what he means is not something political. He means from his point of view out in space when he's out there hanging around. It's the view you get from the space shuttle, and you see the Earth as this beautiful, fragile marble just hanging there in space, and that we need to take better care of it. We should think of ourselves, all of us, this world is Smallville, is a small town, and we should feel like neighbors.
I love that interview. Christopher Reeve really did understand the importance of the Superman character and what makes him so special, and he was also given the proper chance to show that understanding more than any other actor's been able to. Unfortunately, it seems like the character hasn't really been given much of a chance on the big screen as of late, but luckily talks of a new Superman movie are starting to make the rounds again. With rumors about people like J.J. Abrams and Michael B. Jordan getting involved, it seems like DC might actually want to take a crack at bringing the Blue Boy Scout back to the big... Oh. DC Films still doesn't know what to do with Superman. The studio reportedly is unsure how to make the character relevant to modern audiences. That's a load of garbage. The character of Superman doesn't need to be adapted to be relevant to modern audiences. The ideas and values that he stands for are still relevant and important to this day, probably more so than ever. DC has this character who represents hope and kindness in a world where everybody is surrounded by violence and hate, and they don't know what to do with him? A character who is the living embodiment of the phrase, "you can do it," in a world where depression is at an all-time high. Jesus Christ, he's an immigrant that faces off with an evil billionaire president, and they don't know how to make that relevant? Are you serious? Superman is always going to be relevant. No matter how hard the studio tries to spin the character into whatever twisted version that they think works, the core of the character will still be what draws everybody to him. And that's the ideal of hope that he represents. And I believe that in our modern era, we need that beacon more than anything. And audiences know that. There's a reason why characters like All Might, Captain America, and even The Flash to a certain degree are so popular today. It's because we as a culture have moved on from that 2010 mindset that our characters need to be cool and dark and edgy. We're ready for the camp, we're ready for the tights, and we're ready to be hopeful again. But DC and Warner Brothers are on a different path. They seem to think that we want Superman to be watered down or changed to fit within the rest of the modern superhero landscape of quipping action stars and morally gray vigilantes, and so they wait. They wait and they wait until they can figure something out, and all the while, fans crave for a new story about the Man of Steel. Something to sit us down, look us in the eyes, and say, everything's going to be okay. Well, I'm done waiting, so I'm going to use my stupid YouTube channel and whatever clout that I have to turn writing bad fanfiction into an actual job. Here are my thoughts on the direction that DC should go with the character in a movie. Here's the pitch. When you think about what Joker accomplished, that movie was a harsh reality check to show us our failures as a culture and as a people. This movie would essentially be the direct opposite of that. Joker was the movie that we deserved. This is the movie that we need. This is Clark, a Superman story. Now, my idea is a little bit out there, and you'll see why in a minute. It's unlike anything we've ever really seen from the superhero genre. But I think that that's necessary when it comes to this character, because clearly trying to fit him into that mold and that formula doesn't seem to work. So we need to try something new. I propose an Elseworld story, just like Joker. A smaller scale, lower budget film that focuses in on what the character represents and stands for, without concerning itself with other films or a greater universe. And with that comes the casting of Superman. Now, I love Henry Cavill. I think he's the best possible pick for Superman. The guy clearly loves the character and has the capability of giving us the definitive version of Clark Kent if he were given the chance. I've been hopeful that DC just didn't have any plans for another Superman movie and he didn't want to be locked down contractually, so they just put him on the back burner until the opportunity arose. When they inevitably do end up making the next Superman movie, he had better be the first person that they call. But sadly, with each passing day and each new headline, I lose a little bit of that hope. Cavill really deserves another shot at the character, but unfortunately, this movie wouldn't be that. Because for this movie, my go-to casting would be none other than Tom Hanks. I told you it was a weird pitch, but just hear me out. Imagine one of the nicest and most positive actors working today playing the man whose sole purpose is to represent kindness and hope. I mean, the guy's playing Fred Rogers, the real-life Superman. You can't tell me that's not perfect. Now you're probably thinking, well, what about Keanu Reeves? Now I thought about Keanu. I love Keanu. He's breathtaking, all that stuff. I adore him. He's amazing. But as much as I love him, Keanu is just too cool, if that makes sense. He doesn't seem to have that dorky Kansas energy that Clark Kent needs, and I think Tom Hanks can pull off. So from this casting, that means that this version of Clark is older, or as they say on The Masked Singer, seasoned. Tom Hanks is in his 60s right now, so let's just say the character is 60. We're ignoring any kind of slower aging for the character because that mostly complicates things, especially regarding relationships and supporting characters. The movie would be set in a somewhat grim future, like 2030 or 2045, not very different from today, but just enough to be an exaggerated version of the worst possible scenario for us as a planet and as a society. Because we do, in fact, live in a society. Something important to note, despite his age, this version of Superman has never saved the world before. He's saved lots of people, he's saved countless cities and countries, but he's never faced a world-ending threat and put a stop to it. Realism is never something that I care too much about most of the time, but for something like this that would be so grounded, I think that added sense of scale puts things into perspective. Alright, that was a long talk about that, and that's enough premise. Let's get talking about the plot. The movie starts at the top of a building, with a young girl standing at the edge, tears pouring down her face as the wind blows through her hair. A figure approaches from behind her. A man in blue with red boots and a long red cape. He's calm and compassionate when he speaks. Your doctor really did get held up again, Reagan. The man puts his hand on the girl's shoulder. It's never as bad as it seems. The girl looks back to see Superman, giving her the warm smile that she so desperately needed. You're stronger than you think. Trust me. This scene is incredibly famous, to say the least. It's probably one of the most famous scenes in all of comics, but I think that this moment alone perfectly captures what I love about the character of Superman. I know there are some people who think that it's tasteless or a shallow view of the complex world of mental health, but it's the idea behind it that matters. I have a personal connection to this moment and its message, and it's a big part of why I love the character as much as I do. In just a few moments, the audience is able to see just how caring and compassionate this character is, and I think that that's something that's really important to get across. We hear a voiceover. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us today. And we cut to Superman putting on a microphone and sitting in front of a camera. The voice from behind the camera says, "It's such an honor to be meeting you, Mr. Superman, sir. Can I call you Superman?" He pauses. Cal. Call me Cal. Now, like I said, this movie wouldn't really be following any standard procedures with regards to plot structure or character arcs. For the character of Superman, I think that the best way to convey his values is with small snippets of kindness and generosity. It doesn't necessarily need to be within a standard 3-act structure. That flies in the face of anything you've probably learned in English class or film school or wherever, but it's not something that hasn't been done before. One of my favorite movies of 2019, Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, does exactly what I mean. That movie, when you really think about it, is really just a collection of scenes that each stand on their own. Most of the scenes in that movie can be analyzed by a bunch of hungover film students in a lecture without any context. And they each have different points that come together to form the whole. I know it sounds like a weird way to structure a movie, but if you've seen the film, you'll understand that it definitely works. And that's the kind of structure that I think would be perfect for this movie. Imagine the film is broken into segments, and each segment is about a different individual that Clark is involved with, each pushing along the greater plot about Clark's character. Now this might sound weird, but when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Comics are already episodic, allowing for single individual stories that can explore the characters as well as stories that combine into longer narratives. This is why shows like Daredevil and The Flash and also animated series like Batman and Spectacular Spider-Man are so successful, because they're able to adapt that day-to-day lifestyle that's so important to a lot of these characters. Just like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was a love letter to 60s cinema, this movie would ideally be a love letter to Superman. I think a main inspiration for this movie would be, surprise surprise, All-Star Superman. You probably already figured that out from the opening scene, but it goes deeper than just that moment. In one of the early scenes, we learn that Clark's prolonged exposure to kryptonite radiation over time has led to him developing a type of cancer. He only has a few months left to live, so he decides he wants to do all the good he possibly can in the time he has left. Now, I don't think it's necessary to injure or weaken Superman to make him interesting. I know a lot of people feel that way, but I don't think that's the case. So his illness would have no effect on his powers. I just think that it allows us to tell a relatable story about Clark living his life to the fullest by being the best person he can possibly be, and that could inspire audiences to do the same. The movie would be intercut with snippets from the interview I mentioned earlier, allowing us to better see what's going on inside Clark and everyone else's head during pivotal moments, almost like they're in-universe narrators. I don't have ideas for every type of moment that I want to see here, because that's way too much to do. However, I do have a few important ones that I do want to describe. After we're introduced to Clark's illness, I think we should see a classic scene of Superman fighting basic crime. It allows some tension that's ultimately pretty low stakes, but still engaging as a semi-action scene, and allows us to see a side of Clark that we don't really see too often in movies. So there's a hostage situation during a bank robbery gone wrong, and Superman shows up to help. He makes his way into the bank, and he gently talks to the robber, and he starts to convince him to let people go. Clark makes it very clear that what the man is doing is wrong, but he's understanding and compassionate with the man, knowing that times are tough and sometimes there's no other choice. During the talk, Clark slowly approaches, but just before the final hostage is released, the police outside do something to scare the robber, and he pulls his gun on Clark and shoots him. The bullet bounces off of Clark's cheek and falls to the ground, flattened and red hot. The robber looks at the bullet, and then to Clark, and then back to the bullet, and then back to Clark. And then tears start to pour out of his eyes, and he starts sobbing and apologizing to Superman. Clark reassures him that it's okay, and he's just glad nobody got hurt, and he delivers him to the authorities. That's when he looks off into the crowd of people that have gathered around, and he sees her. Lois Lane. The interviewer asks him about his home life, and if he has any family. We learn that Ma and Pa Kent have since passed away, and Clark begins to talk about his relationship with Lois. The two were married for years, but divorced a little while ago. Clark took the divorce pretty hard at first, but he's happy that she's doing well. She's the editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet now, and Clark has since retired to live on the farm alone. But they cross paths once again, and we get a scene with the two of them. This scene starts strictly professional, with Lois getting Clark's side of the story, but it slowly moves to old wounds being reopened. This is where we're first introduced to Clark's main character arc for the movie. A lot of people who are much smarter than me have said that a good Superman movie should have him go through what's known as a flat arc. One of my favorite channels, Just Right, has a video talking about the subject that I'd highly recommend, so go check that out. To sum it up, most stories have a lie that the character believes, only for the character to eventually learn the real truth by the end, thus completing what's known as a positive arc. A negative arc would effectively be the reverse. However, a flat arc is different. The protagonists themselves aren't the ones changing, but instead are affecting the people around them. In a flat arc, the character starts out already in possession of the truth, and then uses that truth to bring positive change to the world around him. Great examples of this would be people like Indiana Jones, Marty McFly, or famously Paddington Bear. While I think that this kind of story would be perfect for the character of Superman, I don't think it would be necessary. By putting Superman through that kind of story structure, you have the effect of making him seem too perfect, which certainly isn't the case for the character. Clark Kent isn't perfect. Nobody is. He's not some godlike being with all the answers. He's just a regular guy from Kansas who was raised to do the right thing and always tries to live by that. Everyone is capable of learning, and Superman is no exception. So instead, I do want to give Clark an arc for this movie. I mentioned earlier that because Clark is dying, his main goal is to do everything he possibly can to help everybody and inspire as many people as possible while he's still around. However, through scenes and interviews with Lois, we learn that Clark's new mindset ruined their relationship, and is what led to him getting a divorce. Clark's character growth throughout the movie would be to realize that at the end of the day, he's just a man. He can't be Superman all the time, and he needs to learn the value of being there for his loved ones and to not abandon the people closest to him. It's a lesson that Barry recently learned in The Flash, and it's a really mature idea that's not really done in superhero media. You don't have to be a martyr to be a hero, which I think is a really good message. You could certainly do a flat arc for this movie and still achieve a similar effect. I just think that Superman is still a human who makes mistakes and grows, so it's important to show that side off and not make him some all-perfect Jesus metaphor. So moving on, I'd really like to see a scene where Clark helps save a cat stuck in a tree, and that leads him down this sort of pseudo-rabbit hole of trying to find who the cat belongs to, and then he can get it home, but maybe the environment isn't really safe for the cat, so he finds it a new family or something. Maybe we can get a cameo from the best Superman character of all time, Krypto the Superdog. There's an astounding lack of superhero dog representation in media, and I find that despicable. Honestly though, I really do think that if you want to make Superman likable to modern audiences, then all you have to do is just give him a dog. Everybody loves dogs. Look what they did with John Wick. While we're talking about dogs, let me take a second and talk about the exact opposite of a dog, Lex Luthor. So Lex Luthor is president. A billionaire xenophobic president with a hair problem who uses his money to avoid jail time for his crimes. This might get a little controversial. Now, I normally actually don't like Trump comparisons for Lex. I don't want to get too into it here since this isn't really the place for it, but I think that those comparisons are pretty disrespectful to the character of Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is one of, if not the smartest person in the DC universe, and I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump is not that. Alright, if I say any more, I'm going to have to disable the comment section, so let's move on. For the scene introducing Lex, I want to take direct inspiration from an issue of All-Star Superman, The Gospel According to Lex Luthor. This scene would consist of Clark interviewing Lex Luthor for the entire time, never once donning the cape and becoming Superman. Since Clark isn't working at the planet anymore, maybe Lex asks for him specifically, and we can establish that they've been friends since childhood, like in something like Smallville. Perhaps Lex is on the verge of being impeached, which is also something that's relevant. What would you look at that? And Clark is there to talk with him and get his side of things. Lex can dodge all the hard questions or spin everything he does to make him seem like the good guy, doing his best to work for the common man to turn them all into Superman, when in reality he's just bettering his own image. Like in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, we have a scene that works on its own, but is also set up for the big final scene at the end. We learn that Lex is developing some experimental technology based on a newly found Kryptonian wreckage that he thinks will change the world. He's creating a satellite that will harness solar energy, and using green kryptonite as a lens can focus the energy into something clean and usable for the people of Metropolis, essentially solving the issue of renewable energy on his own. You see, Lex Luthor wants credit for saving the world. He wants to fix the planet before Superman can, so the history books will forever describe him as a hero and a savior, and Superman would just be a footnote to that. Clark calls into question issues with Lex's plan, but he more or less gets ignored. The satellite is planned for launch in a few months, which is about as much time as Clark has left to live. That's what we in showbiz call a little bit of narrative coinkydinks. That's the official term, don't look it up. For another scene, it would also be really important to see Clark's relationship with his father, Jonathan. Since he's passed away at this point, maybe a flashback or a scene with Clark at his grave, just anything to really show off how important that Pa Kent was to Clark. I think it would also be really special to see that Clark used to practice Judaism, as taught to him by his pa. Say whatever you want, but Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster basically created superheroes as we know them. There's no doubt about that. Two Jewish men in the 1930s were able to influence and inspire billions and billions of people like that. So I think it'd be really beautiful and really important to see that side of them and their personal lives be represented by their creation and live on with him as well. So maybe the scene could be Clark visiting a synagogue for the first time in a while and interacting with people and helping them out somehow, while also reliving his relationship with his father. So again, obviously there would be more scenes than just these ones, but those are the specific ones that I'd like to see. It would also be nice to get scenes alone with characters like Lois or Lex to build up that supporting cast. But now let's move on to talking about the finale. So, no spoilers, but just like in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there's an extended finale/climax scene that's set up by a previous scene in the movie. In that movie, it was the scene where Cliff Booth is in the abandoned set filled with all of the Manson cult, and for this one, it would be the scene with Clark and Lex mentioned earlier. That scene would set up Lex's plan with the satellite, and now at the end of the movie, we get to see that plan unfold. It starts with Clark meeting up with Lois at Lex's unveiling event. At this point in the story, the two of them would have reconnected a little bit in other scenes, and this moment would be Clark nearly fulfilling his character arc. He begins to tell Lois that he recognizes his failures, but before he can get his message across, Luthor's event starts. Lex gives some grand speech about mankind and how he's here to push humanity one step further toward the future, you know, the usual shit. He begins with a test of the satellite, and he orders to cut the power to the entire block. The street is enveloped in darkness before the satellite powers up from Earth's orbit and a beam of solar energy shines down into a generator, returning power back to the street. The crowd applauds for Lex as he states that this is only a fraction of what's possible with this new technology, and that the full power can create clean energy for the entire planet. Suddenly, Clark hears something, and we cut back to the satellite up in orbit, as a small, seemingly insignificant piece of space debris collides into it. Clark's eyes widen, and in the blink of an eye, he speeds through the crowd of people, moving every single one of them out of the way as the beam of solar energy carves its way through the pavement, destroying everything in its path. The beam collides with the corner of a nearby building, and Clark looks up to see the pieces begin to fall on the civilians. He rips off his civilian clothes, throws his glasses to the ground, and leaps into the air to intersect the falling debris. Meanwhile, Lex is scrambling to figure out what went wrong, ignoring his advisors, the Secret Service, and even Lois as he types away on a keyboard in front of him, but that only seems to make things worse. The generator that converted the beam can't handle it, and it explodes, causing even more damage. Lois hears Luthor's advisors say that the satellite is going to explode with enough power and force to destroy the planet, like a massive kryptonite bomb. Superman tries saving as many lives as he can, but people just keep on getting hurt. As he's lifting wreckage off of a pinned civilian, Lois runs up to him and explains the situation with the satellite and how he doesn't have much time before the planet is destroyed. Clark looks around frantically, still seeing so many people in need. His heart begins to drop. I won't be able to save them all, Lois. Then don't. The camera turns to see Reagan, the girl from the beginning that Superman saved. Her forehead is cut, but she's standing tall. Behind her, we see dozens and dozens of other civilians, including the ones we saw Superman help and save throughout the film. Leave that to us. Clark, shocked, says that everybody needs to evacuate. It's too dangerous for them to be there. But Reagan insists. We're stronger than you'd think. She puts her finger to her bloody forehead and paints a red S onto her chest. Trust us. Superman smiles and nods, and they get to work. Lois grabs him by the arm. What are you going to do? He says that he needs to get the satellite as far away from Earth as possible before it explodes, and the only thing close enough that can contain that amount of radiation is the sun. But Lois says to Clark that he doesn't have much time left, and he might not be able to make it. The blast would be pure, concentrated kryptonite radiation, enough to kill him for sure. Clark looks Lois in the eyes and smiles. I'll make it back. Have hope. Lois grabs him and kisses him. Superman places his fist on the ground, and the pavement begins to tremble before he launches up into the sky like a rocket. He breaks the sound barrier as he approaches Earth's orbit, where he finds the damaged satellite. He grabs hold of it and begins to push it further and further away from Earth, towards the sun. As he's pushing it, the satellite begins to glow red hot from the energy. With mere moments left before it explodes, Clark closes his eyes and takes a deep breath.
Philosophically, what does Superman represent to people?
A friend. And that's what people really need most. We're living in an age when people are basically afraid of contact with each other. They're afraid. People live in cities, they don't even know their neighbors. They're afraid to go out in the street. Something might happen to them. Basically, technology is against you. Life is overwhelming. Even the bank doesn't know who you are. And America was founded on the virtues of a helping hand. And I think that is that kind of virtue that's at the bottom. That's the heart of Superman. The genuine love of people, and that you always know he's your friend.
The screen cuts to black, and we're back at the interview as it's wrapping up. The cameras are still rolling as Clark takes off his microphone and everyone starts to pack up their things. The interviewer shakes Clark's hand and thanks him for coming, and Clark says to him, "You said your name was Jimmy, right? Now, listen, I don't want to pry in on your personal life, but I just wanted to check in on you and make sure you're doing okay." Jimmy Olsen stops for a second and stutters. Yeah, I'm fine. Why do you ask?" "I don't need x-ray vision to know when someone's going through a rough patch. I've seen a lot of people who've had that same look. Lately, a lot more than it used to be. And I always tell them this. I don't know what it is exactly you're going through, but I just want to let you know that it's all going to be okay. I know times are tough right now, maybe even the toughest they've ever been. It may feel like the best thing to do would be to give up, to stop fighting and just let the bad guys win. But remember, you're not alone." As Clark speaks to Jimmy, we see a montage of various people around the city watching the news reporting the incident and what appears to be Superman sacrificing his life. Then it transitions to footage of Lois and the civilians helping out with the damages, all wearing shirts with the big red S painted over their chest. Saving people, cleaning up, everybody is doing their part. Even Lex Luthor is chipping in. You're surrounded by people who love and care about you, even if it may not seem like it right now. And those people, your family, your friends, your neighbors, the people you pass on the street, they all have the capacity to love and be kind. They're the ones who are going to help you get back up and keep fighting. It may take some time, but eventually even the darkest of souls can come around and do what's right when given the right push. All it takes is one helping hand, and it can start a chain reaction of kindness and change. That's the thing that I love about humanity. That's real power right there. We see Lois sitting in her home in front of a computer, an empty document in front of her. You don't need to look up in the sky anymore. You're all Supermen. Cut to outside her front door, we hear a gust of wind, and a single red boot gently steps onto her porch. You just have to see it. We cut back to Jimmy. He wraps his arms around Superman and gives him a big hug. "Thank you, Superman. Thank you, Cal." Superman smiles. "Please, call me Clark."